Hello, I'd like to introduce the local heat of the Rotary Young Photographer competition. I'm going to run a simple slideshow and a few notes about each of the pictures that's been entered, and then just let you know which ones I've chosen to be the winner and runners up. My name is Jim Pascoe. I've been looking at the images along with my wife Nikki. We are both full-time working photographers, and I also have quite a lot of experience judging photographic competitions at a range of different levels. So these are just my thoughts on your pictures, and there's some beautiful pictures here, I have to say. The subject of the competition, or the theme of the competition, was the beauty of architecture, and one of the key things is just to ask what architecture is. I did have a quick look in the Oxford Dictionary, and architecture is defined either as the art or practice of designing and constructing buildings, or the complex or carefully designed structure of something. So that gives us quite a lot of scope for variety, if you like, in our pictures, and I think that's an important thing. Here we're looking for a bit of creativity and sometimes thinking outside the box. Anyway, we're going to start off with a picture of a spiral staircase by Harry Price. Very vibrant colours, I really like that. Quite a symmetrical image as well. So Harry's sort of looking down the staircase here, and it would have been lovely, wouldn't it, just to have maybe a person down at the bottom looking up, possibly. But overall, a lovely vibrant picture, and shows a strong sense of design from both the constructor or the architect, the engineer who did this, and also Harry's vision of seeing what he was photographing. Next we have a picture of a stained glass window set in what looks to be a church or cathedral maybe, and again we can see a lot of the design that's gone into this building and the ideas of both the architect of it and the very fine workmanship we've got in the image as well. I quite like the echo of the shape of the stained glass window, and also this sort of foreground arches here. It does suffer a little bit from a lack of focusing in the front, because really the window in the background is the thing of beauty here, and the structure in the front is in the way, but it's also a little bit out of focus, so possibly we have a little problem here with the depth of field, or the depth of focus, if you like, in the image. Taylor's picture looking across the bay, lovely evening view, makes you think of being on holiday, so I really like that. We have got a lot of architecture in this with lots of different buildings, but I love the vibrancy of the colour, and it certainly fits in with the brief of the beauty of architecture. I mean, beauty is in the eye of the beholder after all. I think here possibly the strength of the image is in the mood and the lighting in it, that lovely reflections on the water, rather than the actual architectural quality of the building. So I think it suffers a little bit there, but I think it definitely fits in with the brief. So well done, Taylor. Next, this amazing viaduct here going across the hills. Presumably, I think it's probably a railway viaduct, and it looks amazing design in it. It's not strictly what I would normally think of as architecture, because I normally think of architecture of buildings, but as we saw from the definitions, it doesn't have to be, and there's a really strong sense of design here, and I think Ben, who photographed this, has got a really good composition. All we needed was if it is a railway viaduct, would be the train just sort of coming across with the steam coming out, but I know you'd have to be very lucky to be there at that time. But it's a great image set in the hills. It shows the very natural environment and how man has designed this incredible structure, which is probably well over 100 years old, I expect, and set it within the landscape, so it's quite a nice contrast. Great lighting as well. So I chose this as my runner-up in this category, which is the intermediate category we're doing first. And finally we come on to William's picture here of this, it looks almost like the back of a building, doesn't it? Because certainly the upper parts of it doesn't look like the sort of thing you normally see in the face of a building, and it looks like there's a fire escape there. So we feel that we're sort of around the back or around the side of a building here. Very strong contrast, good idea I think to convert it to monochrome, because it allows the detail to stand out and we don't have any colour sort of distracting us at all. So really well composed. I appreciate, again, like with all these things, it's not you, the photographer, designing the building. You're not producing the architecture, but you're trying to show it as its best. And I think the angle of the lighting, particularly on these curves on the left here, just gives us a real feel for the shape of them. So I think that's a really great image, very simple and direct, and really speaks architecture to me. So this is my winning picture in the intermediate category. So we now come on to the senior category. We start off with this great view looking down the Thames from, I guess, the London Eye. So a very wide sweeping picture here, and we've got a lot of architecture in this shot. I think the light is great, the way it's just grazing across the water there, really giving it a very moody, ethereal sort of feel to it, which I like a lot. It's got, as I say, it has lots of architecture there, lots of design. The amazing bridge. Really, if you made this into a really big picture on a wall, you could spend quite a lot of time looking around it. It does suffer a little bit in a lack of focus in that, by which I mean not that it's not in focus, but we don't have any one thing that sort of we can latch onto. I guess possibly the Houses of Parliament are the thing with that tower there, just are the thing that draw me in mostly, because I think the light's really, really beautiful there. So maybe sometimes with photography you have to home in on something a bit closer to really tell people what you're actually talking about here. So this is a great scene, but doesn't speak to me quite as powerfully as a picture of architecture. We then come on to this very interesting shot by Guerlain, quite unusual. It looks a little bit surreal almost. We're sort of looking down. We've got a mirror here in what may be a bedroom, and then we're looking down onto the front of a house and the road, and then the gates. I find it all quite sort of mysterious, really. Not like anything I would expect from a picture and an architecture competition. So I do quite like the mystery of it. So I think it's a very interesting picture. Wouldn't it be? I think having that open gate there looks like you're just waiting for somebody. Maybe you are. So it sort of asks lots of different questions. I feel though on the theme of the beauty of architecture, it doesn't quite hit the right note for me. So I feel that maybe it hasn't quite succeeded in the set subject, but it's a really interesting, quirky picture, which I do quite like. Darcy has come in very close on a small area of what looks like a little garden place, maybe like a little shelter where people can go and sit and chat, have a coffee or whatever, and it could be in our own garden maybe. So you come in quite tight here, and you're just showing us the chair and the plants and the planter and the fencing. So I think overall it's quite a well conceived image, which I think works very well. It's quite cool in its colour. Maybe that's the way you wanted it. So it has quite a sort of a bluey, greeny sort of slightly cast to it, which I think is absolutely fine. Again, on the beauty of architecture, it doesn't quite sing out to me that it's about architecture. I appreciate there's lots of design here, but overall I think it doesn't quite hold me as in that subject. If I look at this picture, I don't think the beauty of architecture doesn't come across really strongly. So I think it's a good image, maybe not quite on subject as so much as some of the others. Oliver's picture of the clock tower, I believe, shows a huge amount of engineering, and again, like one of the earlier ones, I quite like the fact that it's been converted to monochrome, keeps it very simple, lots of lines. There's a huge amount of design in this building, done by engineers presumably, and an architect to design the overall building. So I think that works really well. You could say the architecture of the mechanism here is quite an important element. Does it say beauty of architecture? I guess if you're an engineer, you probably find a huge amount of beauty in there, because engineers are really moved by that. Maybe it's not classically what I would think of as sort of beauty in architecture, but it's a very strong graphic image, and I think converting it to monochrome has worked really, really well. Tiani's picture, looking down this, it looks like a derelict church. Interesting that you've shot it as a very narrow letterbox, because presumably you wanted to show us the sort of paving in the foreground, right to the foreground, leading you in. So that's quite an unusual. Conventionally people would have probably chopped off the bottom third of this image and just showed us the main part of the building, but it is interesting that you've shown us some of the paving leading into it as well. The whole thing does lean a little bit, like it's a little bit tipped over, and I think probably the building is, I'm assuming, is reasonably level, even if it's a bit wonky in its old age. But so maybe with these sort of things it's quite important to get them upright, and if it's not upright it wants to be really tipped over so it makes it look like it's a creative consideration. Great light coming in, showing us the different depths of the church, and the light just glancing on that brickwork there. There's quite a lot of area in shadow, which it could be a little bit of a problem. Maybe it would have been better shot at a slightly different time when the light was a little bit more even on the front of the building, I would say. But I appreciate you might not have been there at the right time, but it's always worth going back to a place like this again. Isaac's picture of this amazing structure is worked really, really well. Great light on the front of the building. I think that's really well seen, and I can see why you were attracted to take this picture. It must have been really glowing, so we can see how relatively low the light is in the foreground there. I quite like the light from the building reflecting on the cobbled roadway in the foreground, and that looks really shiny, and I don't think it's probably wet, it's probably just polished smoothly, and yes, you've got this lovely reflection in that. So it's a great picture of an amazing piece of architecture. I don't know where it is, but it looks pretty impressive to me. Connor's picture, he's photographed this old castle, and he's used this ball, and I'm not going to pretend. I mean, I have seen some similar pictures of this. I'm not going to pretend I know exactly how it's done, whether it's just a straight picture or whether it's a composite picture, which I think it probably is. But either way, it doesn't matter, because it's a very creative way of showing this particular building, and it just fits beautifully into that ball. So, and then we see the actual building in the background, out of focus as well. So I think it's a very interesting picture, a creative take on that subject, and showing the beauty of this piece of architecture in the background. So that works really, really well, and for that reason I picked this one as my third place picture. Olivia's picture of the trees. At first, again, Nikki and I looked at this and we thought, well, this is trees, it's not really architecture. But of course, when you look at the definition of architecture and the design, and although these are natural, apart from the the fencing, the sort of piece of rope and the little bits of fence in the background, it's very much a natural scene made by nature. But of course, the trees where they are and where they've been planted has been designed by somebody. So because they're all planted in these two straight lines down this little avenue here. We don't know where it is. Maybe there's a big house behind you, but you've decided to shoot this way, and they do have an architectural feel. You've got the natural arch there where they join up. So overall, I thought this was a really good, interesting take, and although it's not what I classically think of as architecture, it certainly would be very beautiful, especially when they're all out of leaf, I'm sure. So it is a man-made, if you like, structure, we could say. So it works really well. So I picked this as my second place picture. And lastly, we come on to Jamie's picture of the school building, I think. Jamie did say in his notes with the picture that the school building is probably not ever thought about in terms of beauty, because it has a function, and most people don't think about it at all. But there's lots of beautiful symmetry and angles. So I think this is right. It's an ordinary, everyday place that most people probably don't give a second thought about or look at, but it was designed by somebody, and quite thoughtfully really, and they probably thought about how these sort of reflective glass panels would work on showing what was coming the other way. So overall, and it's quite a symmetrical image, the way it's been formed and the way it's been produced. So I think it's a very brave decision to go and photograph something that on the face of it probably no one else is going to think about photographing, but it works really very well, and it's a high quality image. It's beautifully focused. The colouring looks a little bit unreal, but I think that's all part of the creative process that you've gone through to try and end up with a picture. So for me, this was very strong on the, okay, we could say it's not a place of beauty as such, but it shows the concept, the beauty of architecture very strongly. So this was the one that we chose as our winning image. Anyway, I hope that has just given you a few notes on our feelings, and thank you very much for sharing the pictures with us. It would be great if you could encourage some more of your friends, and indeed if there's another competition next year, to enter again, because it'd be great to have more entries, and I'm very happy to offer to give feedback on the pictures if you want me to do that. Thank you very much indeed.